Hello, everyone. My name is Lynne Ensor, and I'd like to welcome you to NSF's Regulatory Update webinar, throughout which our Life Sciences, Pharma Biotech Consulting, and Life Science Training team members will be providing regionally based updates related to current regulatory health authority inspections and the expectations associated with them. Changes to the existing regulatory expectations will be highlighted in our presentations towards ensuring your understanding and your organization's preparedness to address them should a regulator come knocking at your door to perform an inspection. For those of you who are not familiar with NSF, our NSF Life Science team supports companies all over the world who rely on our experts to help them navigate the complex and ever-changing regulatory landscape across the full product life cycle, ranging from R&D through commercial manufacturing and distribution. Our life sciences consulting and training teams comprised of global ex-regulators such as myself and industry experts supporting 45 offices around the world. Our team possesses expertise in the areas of pharma, biotech, and medical devices, including combination products, dietary supplements, cosmetic and personal care items, and in vitro diagnostics. NSF's clinical research organization is also available to support the development and trials of medical products. Our team maintains high quality expectations for our consultants and organization to perform a variety of services, including auditing, such as due diligence, vendor audits, and GMP gap assessment audits. We also provide regulatory affairs support, clinical services, consulting, remediation support, and training, including a vast variety of public courses like our highly regarded QP training and aseptic manufacturing courses, as well as our client-tailored courses to support an organization's or facility's need to be prepared for a regulatory inspection. Our team is also available to support a full outsourced partnership for services ranging for life science products development through commercial manufacturing, as we are well aware that organizations are being asked to do more with less resources and staffing as of late. To begin our webinar today, we will first hear about updates based on the United States Food and Drug Administration's expectations, which will be provided by Dr. Julia Marré. Then Dr. Pete Gough will provide us updates from the European Medicines Agency, who will be followed by Dr. Samantha Atkinson to share MHRA perspectives. Dr. Kay Hukin will conclude the presentations by providing current PICS updates.
Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn said, my name is Dr. Julia Marré, and today I'm going to be speaking on US FDA inspections. I'm going to talk about the different categories of inspections. I'll talk about how FDA decides on what inspections are going to occur, both domestic and internationally. And then we'll talk through some of the specifics of what happens during a US FDA inspection, and then what firms are expected to do after an inspection. And today I'm bringing experience to this topic from my time as a senior manufacturing, microbiology, and facilities reviewer at the US FDA. So as I said, there are three categories of US FDA inspections: surveillance, pre-approval, and for-cause. Surveillance inspections are often referred to as routine or post-market inspections. And the way the agency decides on these inspections is really using a risk-based model. The agency looks at the history of firms, and they track all of this over time. So they look and see what observations have they seen at the facility over time? What are they seeing in the marketplace? Are there any adverse events that have been reported from products manufactured at those sites? And that's all part of that surveillance inspection. Then there are pre-approval inspections, and these are also referred to as pre-market or pre-license inspections. And these are initiated when applicants submit an application to the FDA. So there's an NDA, an ANDA, BLA. These are all different types of applications that applicants submit to the agency, asking for approval to manufacture different types of drugs and biologics. And when those applications are received by the agency looks at all of the facilities that are listed in that application, and they look and see, have we done an inspection at this facility before for this type of drug product manufacturing process? And then they look and see what history has happened at that facility. And then if they need to go out and do an inspection, that would be called a pre-approval inspection. So if you're a facility and you've never manufactured using the process that you're proposing in the application, you can expect that you will get a pre-approval inspection before the agency approves that ANDA, NDA, or BLA application. Then the third type of inspection is a for-cause inspection. Now, these inspections are prompted when there's a specific reason the FDA has for manufacturing problems at that site. So either this is brought to FDA's attention because of complaints within the marketplace, or sometimes whistleblowers can spark these for-cause inspections. So those are the three types of inspections: again, surveillance, pre-approval, and for-cause inspections. Now, there's some slight differences between these inspections domestically and internationally. For domestic inspections, so within the US, these inspections are always unannounced. For international inspections, previously, they were announced inspections. So the FDA would say, hey, we're coming to you on these dates. But more often now, these inspections are unannounced. So that's a slight shift that's been happening in the last couple of years. International inspections are now unannounced when possible, right? So sometimes there are visa issues and coordination efforts that make that difficult, but the agency is trying to move towards unannounced in both international and domestic inspections. And very, very rarely, inspections will be remote-based instead of in-person on-site. Remote inspections were expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic, but that's really something the agency prefers to use kind of when they cannot do an in-person inspection. Remotely, it's hard for the agency to get a good sense of what's happening on site and to really be able to see some of the risks at the site when performed remotely. So now we've talked about the types of inspections, whether they will be in person, unannounced, or announced. Now we'll talk through what to expect when the inspection actually is happening at your site. So, investigators show up. The first thing that typically happens is there's an introduction by the firm. So the site will, give an overview of what type of manufacturing they do at the site. They'll talk about some of the products that they manufacture. And then after that initial introduction, they'll do a tour of the facility. And this is really when investigators start to look around and notice things. And this is when I always tell firms, you need to make sure that you are ready to answer questions that are going to dig deeper, right? Investigators like to use this method of peeling the onion, right? They'll ask a question, the firm gives a response, and then they'll ask a question that's maybe a little bit deeper, right? And they're trying to get at where are there inconsistencies, where are they noticing that explanations are not quite well thought out. And then based on those questioning from the facility tour, investigators will then go back and they'll ask for your documentation. So then this next phase of the inspection is really taking a deep dive into your documentation. So your SOPs, your justifications of specifications, asking for any deviations that have occurred and how you've done investigations around those deviations, right? Really digging in to the paperwork and how all of that is denoted at the site. So that's happening during the day. And then typically at the end of each day of inspection, the investigator will hold a brief closeout meeting with the site leadership and discuss what they saw during that day, some things that might then bubble up as observations at the end of the inspection. But at the end of each day, they sort of say, here's what I looked at. Here are some things that I noticed and some things that, that could be concerning, right? Then at the end of the full inspection, the FDA investigator will sometimes provide an FDA Form 483. And when this happens, this doesn't happen at the end of every inspection. A Form 483 is issued when observations have been found at the site that rise to the level that they expect the firm to respond. So if a site receives an FDA 483 form, they are then expected to respond to those 483 observations within 15 business days. So the inspection ends, a 483 form is issued or not issued, right? If it's issued, then the firm needs to provide a written response within 15 business days back to agency headquarters. And then the agency assesses that response to the 483 form and decides on what classification the inspection should be. So at the end of inspection, when responses have been received by the firm back at headquarters, a reviewer back at headquarters looks at the inspection, looks at everything the investigator observed during the inspection, and then decides whether the inspection will be classified as no action indicated, meaning no objectionable conditions or practices were found, voluntary action indicated, meaning objectionable conditions or practices were found, but the agency is not prepared to take or recommend any action, or official action indicated, meaning regulatory or administrative actions are recommended. So there's those three classifications that a firm will receive at the end of their inspection. So NAI, VAI, and OAI. So that's a brief synopsis of what to expect for US FDA inspections. And now I'll hand you off to Dr. Peter Gough.
Thank you, Julia. This is Pete Gough, and I'm a principal consultant with NSF Life Sciences, and I'm going to talk to you about EMA regulatory inspections. The first thing to note is there is actually no such thing as a European Medicines Agency inspection, in that they don't have any inspectors. What the EMA does, the European Medicines Agency, it coordinates the inspections for centrally authorized products, but the inspections themselves are carried out by the national competent authorities of the various European Union member states. So a typical arrangement would be if one of the European countries was the rapporteur for the original marketing authorization application, either for a new application or for a re-inspection for an ongoing one, then often that country would lead the inspection. If the product was to be imported via a different country, there may well then be an inspector also from that country. So for instance, if say Sweden was the rapporteur for the marketing authorization and the product was to be imported into France, the inspection is likely to be led by a Swedish inspector accompanied by a French inspector. However, obviously, it's important that the inspectors have got the right background and experience to inspect the product that is the subject of the inspection, or products and the technology. Some of the European member states are quite small and may not have inspectors with the right background. So again, this might overwrite and this might be the primary driver. But the point is, it's the European Medicines Agency who coordinate that and arrange the inspection using the resources of one of the national competent authorities. All the other inspections for all the other products, the ones that aren't centrally authorized, will ultimately have national licenses anyway, and therefore the country that leads that inspection will be the one with a national license. For Decentralized and mutual recognition procedures, again, typically it would be the rapporteur country, maybe the one of the co-rapporteur countries, would be the people that would do the inspection. Now, in theory, this doesn't matter which EU member state conducts the inspection, because they all should follow the same set of procedures. And this is called the compilation of union procedures on inspections and exchange of information. For those of you that haven't seen this document, you can get to it online. It's towards the bottom of the UDRELEX Volume 4 webpage. That is the EU GMP webpage. There's a section right at the bottom that says other GMP and GDP documents. And usually the first one in that list is this compilation of union procedures. Until August last year, August 2024, it was issued as a large document. It was over 100 pages, and you had to sort of scroll all the way through it to find the information you want. Since August last year, they've split it up into, I think it's about 17 or 18 separate files that you can download as separate PDFs, which is fine if you only want one section of it, but if you want the whole thing, you've got a lot more downloading to do. But it's all there, and that's where the rules on how they conduct the inspection, it's where you'll find things like how they classify the inspections, which I'll come on to in a minute. So it's the procedures that which the European inspectors are expected to follow. Now, unlike the US FDA, routine inspections, pretty much all inspections, are usually announced by the European authorities. That would be typically anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks prior to the actual audit itself. And they will often ask for information. They will check information themselves, because obviously they will have copies of your marketing authorizations. So they will look at the products on the site. They will look at your manufacturing import authorization, because obviously that would pertain directly to the site. A common document that almost always they will ask for is an up-to-date site master file, because that will give them all the up-to-date information about the personnel and the organization, and why it's important for you to keep that document up to date. So, as I said, the inspection is usually announced, so you need to make sure that you are prepared for the inspector's arrival. The inspection will usually start with an opening meeting, where it's not unusual and it's quite common for you to give a short presentation. The inspectors do not like you trying to give them a sort of huge, long 45-minute presentation, but a short opening presentation. If it's a re-inspection, they've been to your site before, a short summary of everything that's changed of note since the last inspection is a good starting point. Perhaps a recap of previous findings and confirmation that you have completed and closed them out. The next stage would usually be a facility tour, and very often they will do this what I would call a trace forward. So they'll start with goods inwards, through to dispensing, through to manufacturing, through to packaging, through to warehouse and goods outwards. So typically they'll follow through, and somewhere along those lines they might take in other support departments like the engineering or the laboratory. During that walk through, they may talk to people. It's important that you have the right hosts, and that they will talk. European inspectors tend to talk to anybody. They'll talk to operators, bench analysts, engineers, and it's important that everybody on site knows that the inspector is there and is prepared to talk to them. Obviously, you need to have your own subject matter experts prepared as well. They will obviously also review documentation. The proportion of time spent reviewing your site, walking around the site, versus sitting in an office looking at paperwork, I would say still generally for European inspectors tend to err on the side of preferring to be out on the site and looking at things and looking at documentation like SOPs while they're walking around. But that does vary from agency to agency. Some might actually spend more time in an office, more like the FDA, just reviewing documents. At the end of the inspection, there will be the closing meeting. It's important for you to take notes at the closing meeting, because unlike the FDA, they do not leave you with any written paperwork at the end of the meeting. The closing meeting is purely verbal, and so you need to actually make sure you've got good notes of what went on. Remember, don't try and defend things at this meeting. Your chances to do that will be during the audit. This will just be the inspector telling you what their observations are. And one of the most important pieces of information you will get is the classification of the inspection observations. Again, as I say, FDA give you that long list on a Form 483. You don't get that from the Europeans, but what you do get is their assessment of how critical each of the observations are. A critical observation is really serious. That could result in the suspension of your manufacturing or your marketing authorizations. And that will be given where there is in the inspector's view, there is a serious risk to patients. Most inspectorates will need to have that confirmed when they get back to their head office, because it does mean they've got to seriously consider taking action against your license. Also, things like data integrity problems may well give you a critical finding. The next category down is major, and here they consider it a serious breach of GMP. And it's possible if you have multiple serious breaches of GMP, as multiple major findings, then they might consolidate those up and call the overall findings are critical. The next classification is other, and it's not minor. A lot of people think the findings are critical, major, and minor, and they're not. They're critical, major, and other. And other just means it's another observation that isn't major and it isn't critical. They don't call it minor because minor has the sort of connotations that it's unimportant, and any observations from the inspector are important and you need to respond to them. Many inspectorates will also give you a series maybe of recommendations. Now, these are not formal observations, they are recommendations, as said, but you would be sensible if you actually took note of any recommendations from the inspector. The time with which you have to respond will vary. Normally, you would eventually get a written summary of the inspection from the inspectorate. If you've got a critical finding, then you will get that very quickly. If you've only got other findings, it might take quite a bit longer, depending on the workload within the agency. And obviously, you need to respond. But that's why you need to take good notes at the closing meeting so that you can start to prepare your comments, your responses to the observations when you get them in writing, prior to actually getting them in writing, so you get them in writing and you can respond fairly quickly. And obviously, with the more serious the observation, the more effort you need to put into it. So that is European regulatory agency inspections in a nutshell. And I'm now going to hand you over to Samantha Atkinson.
Thank you very much, Pete. Great to hear your overview there. Right, so let's get stuck in. I'm keen to provide an update on the UK MHRA's approach to inspections. Perhaps we should start at what we know. The MHRA have been operating a risk-based inspection programme since probably around, 2009, somewhere back then. And risk ratings, they're based on things like the intelligence that they gather. So that can be anything from compliance reports to internal information about previous inspection history and organisational changes. It is worth noting that new sites, or sites that are undertaking formulations or manufacture of really high-risk products, and sites that have previously had non-compliances, those will of course remain high priority. It's also likely that facilities that perhaps supply critical products to the UK will also be of interest to the MHRA and indeed the wider Department of Health and Social Care in the UK. So it's worth considering all of these things prior to an inspection. And before your inspection, the MHRA will require the site to complete a GMP pre-inspection compliance report. For triggered inspections, because these are at short notice, then no compliance report will necessarily be needed, or indeed you have a chance to actually send one in. But there is guidance available on these types of inspections on the MHRA website. The pre-inspection compliance report requests a variety of different pieces of information, but generally it's all around changes since the last inspection or an overview of the organisation, whether that's personnel, products, processes, facilities, and so on. So how do you then go about preparing for your inspection? And how does an inspector prepare? Well, let's think about that first. So in addition to reviewing the pre-inspection compliance report, the inspector might also review products manufactured or imported that the facility is actually producing. The inspector might also consider previous inspection reports, perhaps marketing authorisations or variations, so a whole range of internal intelligence that they can gather. And then when it gets to the inspection, well, it's probably fair to say that this is going to be fairly similar to a lot of inspections, but certainly similar to the EMA approach. For both the MHRA and the EMA, and indeed for most inspections, the primary aim of the inspector is to determine if the quality systems are effective and whether they're in compliance with GMP. And finally, if products comply with their marketing authorisation. Inspectors will also ask questions. As you know, they'll ask different people questions, but they might ask the same questions over and over again. They might ask the same questions in different scenarios. And the reason they're doing this is to gain confidence that the approaches being used within the organisation are consistent. But importantly, they're also testing the effectiveness of them. What you also have to remember is, of course, an inspection is a sampling process. They're not going to look at every single activity that you undertake in the organisation. That's a lot of the job of your own quality management system and your quality team. During the inspection, the MHRA might also want to ensure things like compliance with the Brexit-specific elements, or indeed they might be looking at what products you're manufacturing. If it's sterile, for example, they'll be looking for compliance with the revised Usual-X Volume 4 Annex 1 requirements. So, look at what you're actually undertaking, what you're doing within your organisation, and make sure you're complying with the relevant requirements. When it comes to the actual inspection, well, the flow's fairly similar, I think, for pretty much all inspections. You'll have an opening meeting, a facility tour, documentation review. I would advise that you try and organise end-of-day summary catch-ups with the inspector, but of course there will be a close-out meeting at the end of the inspection as well. My tips for you, I would suggest that you ensure senior leaders are at opening and closing meetings at the very least. Do a dry run. Mock inspections is a great way to really check how you're doing, or an internal audit review. But an external party can really give you that independent approach. So an organisation like NSF could support with that. Ensure that you check all areas, so not just the typical areas that you're doing your day-to-day activities, but include things like plant rooms and ancillary rooms. Make sure your back room is really prepared and ready. It's really key that you provide documents in a timely manner. Don't try to hide compliance issues. If an inspector asks about an area where you know there's a potential compliance issue, share that requested information, but also demonstrate how you have a plan to ensure that you maintain control and that you have a plan to get the system back into compliance. It's really important to build that relationship with the inspector. Openness and honesty really builds trust, but it also demonstrates you've got a really good quality culture. After the inspection, you'll have a post-inspection letter, and you'll need to find a way to actually pull together a corrective action and preventative action plan, including timelines. And if you haven't done that before, again, you might want to look for external support, and that can be a really excellent way to ensure that you've got a good and acceptable response for the inspector. If you do have an accepted response, you should get a new certificate and the final inspection report. But if you have an unacceptable response, this may lead to compliance escalation. Sites where there's perhaps poor compliance, well, they can end up with a compliance management team overview of what you're doing and really monitoring your step back into compliance. If the threshold, though, is met, this regulatory threshold, where they really feel that there's critical deficiencies that need action, you will be put under the Inspection Action Group. And the Inspection Action Group is a group of multidisciplinary individuals from across the organisation at the MHRA, and they're there to identify what regulatory action should be taken, and they will drive that forward with you. It's the highest level of escalation, and it gets the most senior level of oversight in the organisation. Since 2022, I think just generally because of the capacity constraints within the organisation, we have seen that the MHRA has implemented something called compliance monitors, and indeed NSF has a few compliance monitors, should you ever need one. But compliance monitors are there really to support the MHRA in doing that remediation supervision in the sort of intermediary period before another inspection is required. And these individuals tend to be independent consultants that are sort of trained or endorsed by the MHRA. So they are really key to that whole process. So it's good to get engagement with one of those compliance monitors as soon as possible if you are under the Inspection Action Group. Just finally, a word on interim compliance reports. I just wanted to touch on this because it's come up a few times, certainly with some of the clients we've spoken to of late. And the MHRA expectation is that an interim compliance report should be submitted between inspections following significant change, or indeed as requested by the inspector. The inspectors will assess the significance, and of course, as a result of that, your risk rating might change. But equally, the time between your inspections might change depending on the level of change in your risk rating. And that's important because what we're seeing, because of the sort of lack of capacity in the MHRA and indeed other regulatory authorities, is we are seeing a lengthening of that gap sometimes, not just because of the compliance report, but just generally because of capacity constraints. And just to give you an example, in 2010, I think we had something like 37 GMP inspectors at the MHRA, and now, as of about last year, there's about 14. And like I say, the MHRA are not the only ones to face this challenge at the moment. So it's really important you think about how to manage that. And the compliance report is a key part of that, this interim compliance report. So what you need to do as an organisation is continue to operate an effective and mature quality management system. Continue to test the effectiveness of that system, as I say, perhaps through external support, through a mock inspection. Keep good communication going with your inspector by way of these interim compliance reports. Even if you're not necessarily due to send one, do send them periodically. And should you find yourself in a situation where your certificate is due to expire, with no inspection on the horizon, for example, then we strongly recommend that you complete an interim compliance report, send this to the inspector, and detail that upcoming expiry of your certificate. But what I would say is don't leave it to the last minute, because obviously they're very busy, and we want to obviously try and do the best we can to help them through that process. So on that note, I'll finish here, but thank you, and thank you for listening. I hope you found this useful. NSF are here, of course, to help should you need us. But at this point, I will turn right over to Kay Hukin, who's going to move on to other areas around PICs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm Kay Hukin, Executive Director at NSF, and I'm here to talk about PICs, what it is, members, and its relevance to industry. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a PhD microbiologist and have worked in industry for over 22 years, recently joining NSF in August of 2024. Whilst my career has mainly been in small molecule API oral solid dose manufacturing for both commercial and clinical use, I've also experience of steriles and biological manufacturing. I started my career in a microbiology laboratory, transferred to QA, and then moved up over the course of around 10 years, becoming eligible to act as a QP in 2016. For the last 3 years of my time in industry, I worked as a quality director in a large generics manufacturing organisation. Throughout my career, globalisation of supply chains has necessitated a broader understanding of global regulatory authorities and how differing standards can impact the supply chain of the products that I was certifying, which is a great lead into PICs. It's important to clarify from the start that PICs do not inspect or certify pharmaceutical companies. The Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, PICS, was established in 1995 and is an extension to the Pharmaceutical Inspection Convention of 1970. Initially, the intention of the convention was to facilitate mutual recognition of inspections to promote free trade market for pharmaceutical products. However, it's now a more informal cooperation between regulatory authorities that works with inspectors to harmonise GMP standards across global regulatory agencies. Membership is open to any regulatory authority having a comparable GMP inspection system. Currently, there are 56 participating authorities coming from all over the world: Europe, Africa, America, Asia, and Australasia. Before an authority is accepted by PICS, a detailed assessment is undertaken to check if the authority is able to apply an inspection system comparable to that of current PICS authorities. This assessment involves examination of the authority's GMP inspection and licensing system, its quality management system, legislative requirements, and any inspector training that goes on. Routine GMP inspections are also observed by current PICS members. The whole process can take up to 6 years, during which time various changes and improvements can be recommended by the PICS committee. Currently, China, Jordan, Philippines, and the Russian Federation are in this stage of approval. Established participating authorities are reassessed for equivalence on a regular basis. This ensures that both new applicants and older members fulfil the same requirements. Authorities unsure of whether they meet the PICS criteria, who perhaps don't have a quality management system within their inspectorate or who have not attended any PICS training, are advised to perform a voluntary assessment known as the pre-accession procedure prior to applying. Its purpose is to allow interested competent authorities to better understand what PICS is and what the expectations are for becoming a participating authority. Up to 2 years is allowed for this process, and currently Ghana, Egypt, Peru, and Zimbabwe are participating in this stage. So the main aim of PICS is to improve public health by leading harmonisation of standards of inspection frameworks. It also aims to facilitate cooperation and networking between competent authorities, as well as regional and international organisations, thereby increasing mutual confidence. The main activities of PICS are training. Training of GMP inspectors has been at the heart of PICS since the beginning. However, PICS has also opened up some of its training tools to inspectors active in other areas, so not just GMP, but including GDP, good distribution practice, GCP, good clinical practice, and GVP, good pharmacovigilance practice. PICS arranges an annual training seminar for inspectors, and each seminar deals with a specific topic. The seminars are hosted by different PICS participating authorities each year. For example, most recently, the 2024 annual training seminar to inspectors hosted by Anvisa in Brazil focused on the revised Annex 1 of Utrelex Volume 4. PICS has formed several expert circle groups with the aim to enable inspectors to discuss and exchange information on specific technical areas of GMP. This then goes on to develop draft guidance documents and sometimes new annexes to the GMP guide. Some examples that are currently active are human blood, tissue, cells, and ATMPs, quality risk management, controlling cross-contamination in shared facilities, and good clinical practices, as well as good pharmacovigilance practices. Most recently, in January of this year, PICS published a new guidance on remote assessments, together with an accompanying aid memoir providing guidance on the use of remote inspections and a hybrid approach, and how those inspection tools can fit into a company's quality management system. The accompanying aid memoir provides best practices on preparation, conduct, and post-assessment activities specific to a remote inspection. Finally, PICS works hard to develop harmonised GMP standards and guidance documents. Since the EU adopted its own GMP guide in 1989, the EU and PICS GMP guides have been developed in parallel. Both guides are practically identical. In addition to the GMP guide, PICS has been a pioneer in developing a number of guidelines and guidance documents. PICS partners closely with EDQM, the European Pharmacopoeia, the EMA, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization. The sharing of information between PICS participating authorities has become increasingly important at a time when resources, whether in terms of staff or finance, are scarce within regulatory authorities. The scheme relies on exchange of information of GMP inspections purely on a voluntary basis. So how is all this relevant to industry? Well, this does give pharmaceutical organisations a way of gaining a level of confidence in members of PIC's countries and inspections carried out between these authorities. The harmonisation of standards and the close relationships between PICs and EMA drive compliance. Further benefits include a reduction in duplicate inspections, access to market intelligence and sharing of knowledge. All of these benefit PIC's members and the wider pharmaceutical industry. Inspectors and auditors are increasingly referenced in PICs when inspecting facilities within PIC's countries, but who are not supplying the UK, EU or US, and therefore do not strictly need to comply with EU GMP or US CFRs. For example, revised Usual-X Volume 4 Annex 1 on steriles has been fully adopted by PIC's members. Therefore, manufacturing facilities within these 56 countries are required to comply with the revised annex, regardless of whether the product they manufacture is for supply to the EU or UK. In summary, PIC strengthens the credibility and efficiency of pharmaceutical production worldwide and reinforces global regulatory frameworks through cooperation and standardisation of protocols. I'm now going to hand back to Lynne Ensor.
In summary, I just wanted to share how critical it is to be prepared for an inspection. There have been prolonged delays between regulatory inspections, which are becoming more frequent due to the lack of the resources which different health authorities have to support inspections. It is highly recommended to be proactive for site inspection readiness and recommend that you perform third-party audits and internal audits, as well as mock inspections to obtain best feedback and understand where there may be some gaps within your organization's preparedness for the inspection. Storyboards are also a great way to summarize complex issues and to be able to explain and educate a regulator regarding them, as well as providing the chronology of events. It is the responsibility of the applicant and the facility to demonstrate compliance to CGMPs, and that CGMPs are minimum expectations from a regulatory perspective. There is an increasing regulatory focus on quality culture as well as quality management maturity, which are closely linked to be able to provide a holistic view of the culture within an organization. It is also recommended that the senior management are coached, as well as subject matter experts and area owners, to be able to best respond and communicate with regulators and provide clear and succinct responses to regulatory questions, as well as to health authority inquiries during inspections. Last but not least, quality is the entire organization's responsibility. Regulators will have a sense if it is not being supported from the C-suite through all levels of an organization. Inspections are an opportunity to strengthen your operations, demonstrate your commitment to compliance and quality, and identify opportunities for continuous improvement. Should you need any support or help to prepare for an inspection or understand regulatory expectations, our team at NSF is here to help. Thank you all for being part of our webinar. And if there's anything that we can ever do to support you, please feel free to reach out. And thank you again for attending today's webinar.